Hello everyone. I know it's been too long since I've posted, finishing the second half of Bandits and Boars, but without further ado, here it is, Bandits and Boars.
The four men, slightly drunk and rowdy, stumbled down the lonesome dark road under a moonless sky, their voices echoing faintly through the thick night air. The trees loomed like silent sentinels on either side, their branches twisting, reaching out from the shadows. They bantered back and forth, the kind of loose talk that comes after too many swigs from a shared wineskin. "And why should I even have hair if he's got hair like that?" Sevin bellowed loudly to his friends, his words slurring. The four erupted in a chorus of hearty laughter. From a nearby tree, an owl hooted, a low, mournful call that seemed to vibrate in the air, Jade felt almost mockingly. Sevin's entire body jolted in fear. His heart slammed against his ribs like a trapped animal. Embarrassed, he darted his eyes side to side, checking if his companions had noticed. They hadn't, or at least they pretended not to, so he forced a laugh, though it came out awkward and strained. Thomas piped up among them. "How do you think we'll take the Foresters' camp? I say we make some plans." He offered it casually, but there was an edge to his voice, a flicker of excitement for the violence ahead. Jade's brow furrowed, deep wrinkles etching across his weathered forehead like cracks in dry earth as he pondered it seriously, the weight of his perceived leadership pressing on him. Sevin jumped in suddenly. "We could burn it down," he slurred drunkenly, a puzzled smile twisting his lips. "That's your solution for everything," Aaron argued, his face flushing with irritation, barely resisting the urge to shove or slap Sevin. Jade just grunted and shook his head in disagreement, his eyes narrowing in the dim light. "Burn it down. That's always your go-to, Sevin. There could be 20 men in there. If we set it ablaze, we risk alerting them all at once. And we can't torch the whole thing evenly, can we? Plus, what exactly are we burning? It just doesn't make sense." "Well, what's your plan then?" Sevin shot back defensively, and his cheeks burning with embarrassment and annoyance, mingling like sour wine in his gut. "I made a plan, so now you make one, if it's so easy." "We'll have to hit them at night while they, or most of them, are sleeping," Thomas interrupted confidently, his voice steady despite the booze. "They'll only have 10 men on watch at most. That's how we even the odds, and if we take them silently, we get the rest as they slumber." "Stop, fellas. We won't know a thing until we get there and see the camp firsthand. Until then..." Sevin tried to butt in, but Jade simply continued, a bit louder, his tone commanding like a storm rolling in. "Until then, we just wait and rest our minds." A moment of silence fell over them, thick and uncomfortable, until Aaron broke it. "I hate to say it, but I have to agree with Sevin on this one. Why not make plans, Jade?" "Well, you're all drunk for one," Jade shouted, his frustration boiling over. "You're drunk too, Jade," Thomas said bashfully, trying to defy Jade's dominant tension. "Exactly," Jade replied, exasperated. "Just tell Sevin to make another joke. That's all his ideas are worth." "Hey, that's not half bad," Thomas exclaimed with an abrupt laugh. Sevin chuckled lightly along with him, more out of defiance toward Jade than genuine amusement. The four continued walking, passing around a pouch of wine in uneasy silence. After a while, Thomas grumbled that he was tired of trudging on. They veered off the main road, finding a small clearing, shrouded in mist, where they set a meager fire that flickered weakly against the darkness and bedded down for the night, the forest softly whispering its chaotic rhapsodies around them. The next morning, the men huddled around a smouldering pile of sticks, the acrid smoke stinging Sevin's eyes as he woke. After a hasty meal of fire-roasted meat, stale bread and beans that sat heavy in their stomachs, they packed their saddles and resumed their journey along the main road. The blue early morning light filtered through the foliage like shards of glass, casting prisms on the leaves that danced whimsically in the breeze. The air was dry and sweet, infused with the scent of decaying leaves and the tart wine dangling from Aaron's saddle. Aaron inhaled deeply, a rare moment of gratitude washing over him for his life as a bandit. The freedom, the loot, the lack answer to. For just an instant, he thought of Jade's overbearing ways, but he shoved it aside, refusing to let it sour his mood. There are no rulers as a bandit, he mumbled silently to himself, a joyful spark in his chest. Aaron glanced at his companions, wondering if they shared the same thrill. A shiver raced down his spine, flushing his nerves and raising goosebumps on his arms and legs. Across from him, Sevin rode slumped atop his horse, his face nuzzled into the animal's mane, the beast plodding along without guidance, its hooves crunching leaves that sounded loud in the quiet. Aaron considered tossing a crumb of bread at Sevin for a laugh, but decided to save his rations, at least until they hit the next town or inn. A few hours later, the men were still riding along the main road toward the forest Philip had directed them to. It would be another day's ride to their destination, and from there, another day and a half to the foresters' camp. As they plodded on, Aaron spotted a caravan of travelers about a half-mile ahead, the bandits' wagons creaking like old bones. "Fellas, look at that," Aaron said, pointing with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "What's that?" Jade asked inquisitively, squinting into the distance. Thomas and Sevin just stared, a look of malaise settling over them like fog. It was the same caravan they'd planned to rob, that is, before Jade's old friend Philip had schooled them in poaching and offered them the richer bounty at the foresters' camp. Aaron spurred his horse ahead, excitement bubbling in his veins like boiling poison. The others followed, picking up their pace to match. Once close enough to see no armed guards accompanied the group, Aaron's heart licked, a wicked grin splitting his face, revealing yellowed teeth that gleamed unnaturally in the light. Jade, noticing this, and knowing Aaron's erratic, violent nature all too well, called out in a hushed shout, "Aaron, slow down!" But Aaron ignored him, charging forward. He sped past the first cart and halted his horse abruptly behind the second, the lead wagon in the rickety line. A man and woman walking alongside the cloth-shaded wagon nearly stumbled, trying to dodge his galloping steed. A woman in the cart gasped. Another in the back spotted the three riders closing in and whispered fearfully to those around her. Hearing the commotion, the wagon leader slowed his horses. Aaron addressed the couple he'd nearly trampled. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" he drawled, gazing wistfully through the trees, his eyes holding a predatory glint. The man, kerfuffled, looked up at Aaron. "Yes," he said cautiously. "Very nice. Where are you headed?" Aaron fixed him with a haggard stare. "Just out riding with my friends." He raised one eyebrow deceptively. The man's wife whispered something Aaron couldn't catch. "Friends," the man repeated, trying to stay calm. "Yes, friends." Aaron taunted back, his expression twisting with agitation. At that point, Jade signaled Thomas and Sevin to hang back while he loaded his crossbow conspicuously on his horse's side. Sevin and Thomas, catching on, braced themselves for combat. Things escalated when Aaron, still harassing the man, zeroed in on a necklace around his neck. "What's that there?" Aaron demanded, pointing forcefully at the man's chest. "What's what?" the man replied nervously, glancing down. "Around your neck? The chain?" "Oh, this? It's a keepsake. My father gave it to me for our wedding." The man's face clouded with strange sorrow. His wife touched his shoulder comfortingly, and his expression brightened faintly. "Looks nice," Aaron said with mock approval. "Let's see it." "Oh, well, it's not so nice, really," the man hedged. "Well, I'd like to see it," Aaron pressed, frowning with furrowed brows. "It's really not much, just a brass bear, nothing fancy." The man restrained his frustration, but his voice trembled. "Is this how you treat every wanderer you meet, sir?" Aaron glared at the man's wife, then back at him, his wide, dark eyes forceful, accentuating the word wanderer like a threat. Aaron yanked back on his bridle, intentionally steering his horse toward the couple, forcing them to dodge being squished between the mount and the wagon. The man put out an arm to shield his wife from falling into the cart, clenching his other hand at his chest, gripping the necklace firmly. "You chaff!" the man blurted loudly at Aaron, immediately regretting it. "It was my father's, and I shan't be parted with it," he shouted defiantly. Seeing this, Jade, Sevin, and Thomas spurred forward. Jade motioned Thomas to flank the other side of the wagons. Panic rippled through the caravan. People screamed, a baby wailed, women shrieked. One man fumbled frantically for his bow. Aaron shouted back, "We'll see how shalt you part with it." He drew his sword. The man's wife gasped, yanking her husband away. The wagon leader halted as a woman behind urged him to flee. The man, still clutching his necklace, jolted back, slamming his head on the wagon. In trying to steady himself, he let go. Aaron seized the moment, smashing the man in the jaw with his sword's hilt. As the wife screamed, cradling him, Aaron sheathed his blade, snatched the necklace, tearing it free while she futilely batted at him. Aaron heard Sevin yell his name, charging toward him. Necklace in hand, Aaron kicked his horse repeatedly, yelping, "Yah!" and bolted away. Sevin followed close, an arrow whizzing between them as their horses thundered up the road. Jade trailed, then Thomas, dodging a peasant's sword, thrust from a cart, twisting his body to avoid falling. Another arrow thudded into the earth behind as they distanced themselves from the migrants. The caravan didn't pursue, but the bandits rode hard for some time before slowing. As they eased, Jade barked furiously at Aaron. What was that fucking foolishness? Just a bit of fun, and look. Aaron dangled the necklace. No plan, no communication. Sevin was almost shot down the sheer. Jade lunged for it, but Aaron yanked it away. If you wanted something, you should have taken it, and it's what we do. Aaron spat at the ground. One of those toughs almost stabbed me because of your forward thinking. And it's not the first time, Thomas added. On the Rosepot raid, you were so drunk you couldn't aim, and nearly stabbed me in the ribs, you donkey's tail. And now Sevin here was almost shot. Sevin looked down bashfully. Aaron eyed him doubtfully. Nah, Sevin nodded. I was almost shot. Jade was about to speak when Thomas interrupted. And when I tried stealing that blind man's purse to impress that maid at the tavern, you ran ahead and snatched it yourself. Jade stared confused at Thomas, baffled by the relevance. Once we finish with the foresters, you leave her on. And what if I don't leave? Aaron said. Then I'll cut you down, Jade promised, his eyes darting ferociously. You're not my master, Jade, Aaron proclaimed proudly. Then what do you think, Thomas? Sevin. I was almost stabbed, so I'll do the same to you if you try to stay after this, Thomas said coldly. I don't know that you were almost stabbed, Aaron replied. Look at Betty. Thomas pointed to his horse's bleeding side. Aaron made a scoffing face. Sevin, what about you? You've always been a dick to me. I'll help Jade and Thomas kill you, Sevin said matter-of-factly. Well, it's like that then, is it, boys? Aaron uttered with disappointment, as if ashamed for them. Yes, the other three said in near unison. The next few hours they rode in tense silence until Jade spoke. Can I see it? See what? Aaron replied. The necklace. You should have found your own, Sevin dismissed. I'm not going to steal it from you. Just want to see what it's made of, Jade said cordially, trying to ease Aaron. And how will I know you won't stab me in the back for it? It's not valuable. It's just a keepsake, Aaron said abruptly. That's how you know I won't stab you for it, Jade grinned encouragingly. Aaron reluctantly handed over the brass and tin bear. It's nice, Jade said, clenching in his hand as a joke, before tossing it back. They nodded knowingly and chatted as they rode, until the four bandits camped early. They made quick starts the next 2 days, arriving at Grey Hill that evening. The group headed straight to the tavern for drinks, rest and recuperation after their grueling journey. Chapter 4, Dogtown Maid. The men clustered around the table, disillusioned and swaying, belting out a hymn. There once was a Dogtown maid, who was a whore by trade. For 4 2-pints at a whack, she'd lay on her back. Thomas led, and let the fellas have a poke at her crack. The others chimed back in as they all sang in unison. One day, to her surprise, her belly began to rise. The others stopped. Now Thomas took the lead. Her slit gave a grunt, and out came a runt. They all sang in unison again with his balls between his eyes. The others chimed in jovially. Oh, and the moon shines tonight on dear old Franny, while she lays a-sleeping, as shadows creeping, with eyes a-gleaming, No hopes for weaning, dear Dogtown maid. At the end, they slammed their mugs, foam and beer sloshing wildly. They guzzled the frothy, bitter brew until empty. When Sevin finished, he sighed and fell back in his chair, rocking on its hind legs. The other three toasted him amid wild laughter. Jade wiped his mouth, chuckling, then spun his hand in the air and staggered to the counter for another round. Jade stumbled at the bar, steadying himself. The barman approached. "Another 4 rounds of that same beer," Jade shouted too close. The man startled, then grabbed mugs and filled them from the keg. Half turned, the barman slurred, "How do you like the ale? It's made by the owner of this fine house of spirits," clearly intoxicated himself. "It's good. It gets the job done. Can't afford compliments for the taste. But that's not why I drink the stuff, ain't it?" Jade eyed him suspiciously. He noticed a stranger chatting with Aron at their table, sobering him instantly. It's 50-50 if something comes of it, Jade thought, knowing Aron's rough impulsiveness. The barman handed over the mug skillfully. "Enjoy," he boomed. "I'll be back," Jade retorted slovenly, careful not to spill the foam atop the dark liquid. "What's with the commotion?" Jade asked, nearing the table. The stranger was grabbing at Aron's chest, trying for the necklace, while Aron laughed jovially. Sevin stared concerned. Thomas laughed along. Jade smiled, setting drinks down, but the man unknowingly elbowed Jade, spilling all 4. Caught off guard, in confusion, anger at wasting 10 pints of fine ale, and his inebriation, Jade slugged the man across the face. As he went down, Aron leaned back. The man's chin met Aron's knee perfectly, as if it were a second blow. He toppled as Aron stood quickly. The tavern fell shocked, except Thomas, still howling at the song, oblivious. Aron heard a scream across the room, a group of men rising, one pointing and yelling at the bandits. Jade stood over the unconscious man, who clutched Aaron's necklace and a torn piece of his shirt. Jade felt bewildered but proud at once. "Aaron, boys!" Aaron pointed at the approaching men. Thomas and Sevin leapt up from their seats. The leader charged Jade. Sevin tackled him, exchanging blows on the scum-tarnished wood floor. One kicked Sevin off. Jade swung, missing. Thomas fisted up against 2 others. They charged. Thomas punched, tried tripping one, but lost balance. Slammed to the floor, boards creaking, knocking the wind out of him as they pummeled him. Aaron smashed a chair over one atop Thomas. Jade and another circled cautiously. Sevin groaned on the ground, regaining composure. On his back, he tripped Jade's opponent. Aron and his foe clenched, struggling. Thomas battered the floored man. Sevin rose, deciding where to strike. The man clutching the necklace regained consciousness, adrenaline surging, drew a knife, rushing at Jade's back. Sevin swung his sword, hacking into the man's shoulder, slashing through collarbone. The man screamed, crumpled. A woman pierced the air with a shriek. "Call the guards!" A patron fled Dot. The fighting paused as they stared at Sevin and the pale, bleeding man. Seasoned brigands, Aron, Jade, and Thomas recovered faster, drawing swords, swinging not with the intent to kill, but to dictance. The standing men backed off, bruised and drunk. "Come on," Jade said somberly, heading for the back door. The tavern patrons watched in silence as brigands hurried out. One knelt by the fallen man, pale blue, cold, still clutching the necklace. His friend shook him futilely. Another grabbed his sword, chasing out back the same way Aaron, Thomas, Jade, and Sevin fled, but the bandits were gone. The patron that had run out earlier returned. "Guards are coming." The barman nodded sadly, pouring on. Jade led them to the stables, dodging guards and arguing with Aron again. "You could barely stand," Jade barked at Aron. Bewildered, feeling underappreciated, Aaron retorted softly, frustrated. "He was going to stab you. I saved your life." "Not if the guards get us, you donkey's tail. You may have killed us all again. Never use a sword in a tavern, especially if you started the fight, you twat," Jade whispered bitterly. "You started the fight." "Shush! The stables are here," Sevin interrupted. Aaron swallowed his words. "I'll check for guards. You stay." Jade crept left, hearing voices. Peeking through a barred window, he saw 2 men and 4 horses. Hopping down, he motioned with his hands. The others crept over. "Move now, before guards," Jade urged in a hushed voice. They rushed in, untied, mounted, and rode out back, fleeing to the forest. They rode through the night to evade capture, camping at early noon before the sun rose. "We'll camp here, set out later. Rest up. Plenty of danger and bounty await with those foresters." "Aye," Thomas and Seven agreed. They slept nearly 6 hours before packing, continuing all expectant and nervous for their dangerous task, seizing the foresters' camp. "Thomas, I trust you for first scout, your smallest and sneakiest," Jade said as they rode in darkness. "You'd do just as well," Thomas half objected. "You did fine at the stables." "That was to escape my anger at Aaron." "You'd be surprised what I can do when properly motivated," Jade said slyly. They laughed. Thomas agreed. "I'll do it. Don't lose your head. We're counting on you. Don't mess up, or I'll kill you twice." "Thrice," Aaron added. Thomas nodded proudly. Hours later, night fell. Jade spotted distant, flickering firelight. "That must be it." They stopped. Thomas dismounted and fastened his sword, vanishing toward the light in the darkness. "If you hear screams, don't follow," he called back from the pitch black. 2 hours passed. Thomas returned. They planned. The camp was walled with gates at either side. Thomas had spotted 4 guards patrolling the wall's gates, one resting at Weathergate, while the other walked the perimeter in a circle. The rest slept in 2 thatched huts. Aaron and Seven would climb the walls, Seven taking the front gate guard, opening it for Jade and Thomas, while Arona at the east wall takes the patrolman, then split in pairs to take the back gate, and last patroller, man. If that went well, they'd take the rest as they slept in the barracks. If poorly, they'd flee as fast as their tired feet could take them out one or the other gate at either end of the camp. Soon the 4 men approached the sturdy wood. Forrester's raid. "Well, I ain't got a dead man's eye. Lord, that was a win," Jade said softly as the hushed laughter subsided. "Where do you come up with this whore's cocky?" Jade asked Thomas. Seven and Aaron crept into position, crouching beside the west wall. They waited, giving Jade and Thomas time to get in position at the east of the camp. Aaron and Seven climbed over the wall into the encampment and went cautiously in opposite directions alongside it. Just moments later, Jade and Thomas did likewise. Thomas silently stalked behind one of the night watchers. Slowing his breathing, Thomas pulled out his dagger. Sleuthing close behind the forester, Thomas plunged the knife into the back of the man's neck, just beneath the skull, while his hand wrapped over the hunter's mouth. The night watchman let out a muffled gurgling sound as Thomas slid his knife from his neck and gently laid him down. Thomas then rolled the man beneath a large wooden support that held to the wall before continuing forwards. On the other side of the camp, Aaron approached behind another watcher. Before Aaron could attack, the man suddenly turned towards him. In an instant, Aaron leapt forwards and in one fluid motion, tackled him to the ground, covering his mouth as the man let out a muffled scream behind Aaron's gloved hand, trying to alert the other hunters or night watchmen. Mid-scream, Aaron plunged his blade through the man's solar plexus. The hunter's eyes immediately rolled back. His screaming stopped, but for good measure, Aaron elbowed the already incapacitated man in the face, springing forwards with all his weight, breaking the man's nose and cheekbone with a wet crunch. Aaron surveyed around to see if the struggle had alerted any others before getting back to his feet. At the front gate, Jade took his man, with the handle of his sword in one hand and his other chain-mailed hand grasping the blade of his sword. He looped the blade over the man's head as he sat, unaware, on a stump at his post. Jade pulled back. The blade of Jade's short sword first caught the edge of the man's chin. Before the hunter could make a sound, Jade continued the cut, bringing the man's back to his chest, slicing through his throat, almost decapitating him. Jade's blade stopped at the man's spine. Blood sprayed from the 2 halves of the man's neck, watering the ground. The bandit laid the man down and wiped his blade on his thigh, savoring the bitter metallic smell of his blood. The patrolling guard was walking towards the front as he passed Seven, unaware of his presence in the darkness. As the man crossed Seven's path, Seven walked out behind him. Placing a gloved hand over his mouth, Seven stabbed the man in the lower spine just above his hips. The guard's legs crumpled, putting the man's full weight on Seven's knife. Seven could feel the cracking of knife scraping against bone as he guided the man's limp body to the earth. Pulling the blade from the man's back, Seven stabbed 3 times at his head before continuing on. At the back gate, Thomas calmly walked towards a man posted there. Thinking Thomas to be his friend on patrol, the hunter continued looking out calmly into the forest. He was met with the steel of Thomas's sword. His temple was cleaved in two as Aaron ran from the other side of him, catching the man's body as it fell. Aaron laid him down while Thomas walked to open the gate as a means of escape. Aaron looked to the other side of the camp where he could see the dark silhouettes of Seven and Jade at the front gate. Jade waved his hands at Aaron, signaling to start the next phase of their plan. The bandits met at the campfire pit, lit 2 torches soaked in beeswax. Jade and Seven stood beside the entrance of the 2 adjacent huts, where the foresters calmly slept. Aaron and Thomas walked around the huts, setting fire to their thatched roofs. After setting fire to the full circumference of the thatching, they damped their torches and waited. 2 men beside the only exit of each door. The bandits waited for 15 minutes before the men began to stir from their rest. They could hear panicked, indiscernible mutterings inside the first hut as the men inside woke their companions. When the first huntsman tried leaving the hut, Aaron slashed through the back of his neck, and the same to the second. The third man tripped on the body of his friend. Thomas stabbed him in his armpit while he waved his arm in confusion. It went on like this for most of the men. They would run out in a panic and be cut down by one of the bandits. One man made it past a bit further, but was taken care of by Jade, throwing a large knife into his shoulder, then stabbed with a sword as he lay on the ground. Like slashing at fish jumping from a barrel, almost comically, a man would run out in a panic and be cut down. Jade and his companions made quick work of most of them. A couple of men, noticing their situation, decided to stay in the burning hut rather than being cut down or impaled by a blade. Now, one of the men could be heard kicking at the inner wall in an attempt to make a second exit, but to no avail. Embers and small flaming sticks began raining down inside the huts as the fire made its way through the thatching. The men inside began to scream as fire rained down around them, blistering their skin. They continued on as their hair caught fire and their eyes boiled. 2 men embraced each other in their last moments just before the roof caved in, and in a few minutes, the screams had stopped. Inside the still burning huts, the skin of several hunters melted and charred into one. Their bodies would be visible once the fire had died down the next morning. 2 blackened, charred corpses embracing each other, still kneeling upright. After all had gone well, the 4 bandits cheered, having bested over 10 men 8-handed. Jade told Seven and Aaron to circle the camp in case they had missed. After the fire, Thomas went straight to the ground room while Jade searched around the hearth, finding some cured meat in a satchel by a sitting log. He gorged as he searched the rest of the camp. Thomas in the ground room was surrounded by a plethora of smoked, cured, dried meats and herbs. But he entirely ignored this as his eyes fell upon 3 charred barrels. There were always good things in charred barrels, he thought. He walked over to them and tapped one, removing the cork. Putting his nose close to the hole, he smelt rich red wine. His eyes softened, almost closing as he smiled. Still holding the cork to give the boys a sniff, he began to climb the ladder, hoping to find a cup by the hearth. But he stopped when he heard something rustling somewhere in the ground room. He unsheathed his short sword and dagger. Hunched, he started stalking around the ground cellar quietly, listening. Eventually, he heard hushed breathing and the smell of urine. To his right, behind 2 fresh hanging deer carcasses. Thomas made his way to them slowly. As he got close and prepared to charge through them, he heard the whimpering voice of a man. "No, please, you mustn't." The frightened voice chattered aimlessly. Hearing this and understanding that this coward would not be a threat, Thomas restrained his charge and resolved to play with the man a bit before killing him. Thomas slid his two weapons between the deer carcasses, slowly parting them. "Oh, and why mustn't I?" he sardonically asked the man, his face now peering at him between two skinned beasts hanging from hooks. The man was huddled in a corner, visibly shaking in a puddle of his own urine. I can warn you." "Help you," the man said, shaking. His foot twitched and splashed in the puddle of urine, a few drops landing on Thomas's shoes. Thomas grunted low and looked at his feet disdainfully, then back at the man. "Help me. Maybe I should give you my dagger. Then you can save me the trouble," Thomas said, smiling, then laughed. As he said this, the man let out a fearful cry. "Oh," and he quickly turned his face to his shoulder. "Well then, tell me, how can you help me?" Thomas asked with clearly fictitious caring. The man slowly turned his face back to Thomas. As he did this, Thomas walked closer, stabbing his knife into the hanging venison. I take my life if you wish. I thought the forest is cursed. I must warn you. Cursed. Ah! Thomas laughed. By now, Seven and Aron were walking back in through the back gate. Jade was sitting, back turned to the hearth, facing the still burning huts, chewing on a piece of cured meat from the bag he found. Aaron and Seven walked to him. "Give me a piece," Aaron said, sitting next to him on the log. "Oh, me too," Seven asked, sitting at the other side. Jade, with his stare unwavering, glaring at the burning hut, reached into the bag, handing them each a piece. "I hate it when they do that," Jade says. "What?" Seven asked. "When they decide to burn like that, it spoils the fun of it," Jade answered while chewing. Aaron and Thomas nodded silently. They sat there silently now, all of them staring at the two figures of men in the still burning flames. None of them would say it, but it was not the sight of them burning there that bothered Aaron, Jade, and Seven. Rather, it was the recent memory of their screams. A burning man's screams are more stinging than a man being stabbed, cut, or shot down. The certainty of a blade or bolt was nearly absolute, if not encouraging. But a burning man, the sheer sorrowful pain in the scream of a man who has chosen to burn, is hard not to feel. The way their voices crack with the fire, and how they go on for so long, and the way they abruptly stop. Yes, they would not say it, but it took the joy out of their killing, because they could not help but to empathize with the screams of a burning man. And empathy was a most foreign emotion for men like them, though they would not accept that fact either, if they had the care or mind to think it, but they did not. So they just sat staring for a while, in disbelief of their own hearts. Sevim was the first to break away from himself. He looked around, turning his head to either side as far as it could go, and asked, "Where is Thomas?" Jade and Aaron broke out of it. "He went to the ground cellar," Jade replied. "Ah, the ground cellar," Aaron said to himself excitedly. He stood up and skipped over to its direction, merrily. As he got close, he could hear Thomas happily shouting at someone and the sound of him climbing the ladder. "I'm going to show you to my friends. Let's see what they think of these curses." Thomas laughed as he prodded the man up the ladder with his sword. Aaron stopped and gave the man an intensely rough expression as he climbed out and unsheathed his sword. Thomas climbed out behind him. "Look what I found," he said, when he noticed Aron standing there. "And how is this?" Aaron said, sticking out his chest. "Oh, well, I didn't get his name," Thomas spoke aloud. "What's your name?" Thomas said angrily, roughly poking the man's side with his sword. "What's it matter my name? You're only going to kill me anyways," the man said resolutely, now looking back at Thomas, staring at Aaron. "Well, we haven't gotten to that part yet, and my esteemed companion wants it to know. So let it out," Thomas grumbled, and gave the man another poke with his blade. Aaron, still with his chest extruded, sheathed his sword, smiled, and made his best nobleman's face, raising his brow and tightening his cheeks while staring at the man expectantly. The man exhaled and said, "Timothy." very unenthusiastically. "Timothy!" Thomas said, and inexplicably laughed to himself. "Ah, Sir Timothy," Aaron said, outstretching his arms and bowing. "Welcome to our humble camp. If you will accompany me to the hearth, we may soften your palate, and I may introduce you to the others." Aaron went on, now doing his best impression of a nobleman's servant. Aaron gracefully glided his hands, guiding Timothy in the direction of the hearth. Thomas made a large grin and poked Timothy a few more times while nodding. As Timothy walked, he looked in horror at the burning huts and the pile of his friends' bodies. Turning back to look, Aaron noticed his dreadful expression. "Pardon the mess. We just had a bit of a celebration," he said in his most eloquent voice. Timothy winced, holding back tears as he walked. Chapter 5, last one. At the fire, Seven and Jade were still sitting. "Thomas found something," Aaron said to Jade and Seven as he approached, and then they both looked up at him and then behind him to Thomas and Timothy, expectantly. Their expressions turned serious when they noticed Timothy. Timothy, let me introduce you to my friends and trusted companions," Aaron shouted, still trying to make a show of it all, but now falling out of any discernible caricature. Aaron took a seat at the other side of the fire as Thomas prodded the man to the stump next to him. He stood there for a moment. "Timothy, is it? Well, have a seat then," Jade said, looking at Thomas, wondering why Thomas had not just killed the man in the first place. "Sit down," Thomas shouted in the man's ear and placed a hand on his shoulder, forcing him to sit on the stump next to Aaron, and Thomas sat on the other. Thomas looked back at Jade. Jade was still staring at Thomas seriously. "The man has something to tell us," Thomas shouted to Jade. "Go on. Tell them what you told me," Thomas asked Timothy. Timothy sat there staring blankly into the fire pit. Timothy was so sullen after seeing the bodies of his companions and friends that he did not even register what Thomas asked him. Moments passed. Timothy still remained silent. The men looked angrily at Timothy. "Speak!" Aaron shouted, slapping the back of Timothy's head. Timothy looked up grimly across the fire at Jade and Seven. "You should not be here," Thomas and Jade laughed. "Why? So you can keep this beautiful forest to yourself," Jade said, looking over his shoulder at the burning huts and bleeding bodies, then back at Timothy gruffly, making the point that Timothy was the last man. "No, we intend on staying for a while. There are enough beasts in this forest for all of us, though I don't expect your friends to have much of an appetite," Jade continued, his face twisting from a hauntingly sad one to a large grin. "So you intend on hunting?" Timothy said, and looked down, wearing a faint smile. "It's an odd time to be smiling, Timothy," Jade said. "You think we can't hunt," he continued. "We did pretty well with a lot of you," Seven sassed at Timothy. "That we did," Jade said, nodding at Seven. "Yes, we intend to hunt." "And what's so gay about that?" Jade asked. Thomas and Aaron were now staring at Timothy, still smiling, with anger and confusion. "Nothing. I think that's great, just fine," Timothy said softly. Aaron stood up and kicked Timothy off his seat. "You think we can't hunt?" Aaron shouted at him on the ground. "Well, maybe we need more practice then." Aaron took out his dagger. Timothy looked up at him blankly. Wait, Aaron! He still hasn't told you the best part," Thomas shouted at Aaron. Aaron looked at Thomas, then at Jade. Jade nodded and motioned with his hand for Aaron to sit. Aaron looked back at Thomas with disdain and sat. "You're a lucky man, Timothy. My friend here thinks you have some important information for us," Jade said. "Go on, get up and tell them," Thomas said excitedly, smiling. "This better be good." Aaron grumbled in frustration. As Timothy got back to his feet, Thomas looked over at Aaron and asked him to get some wine from the ground cellar for Timothy and himself. Aaron's eyes widened with rage. "Get it yourself." Thomas looked over at Jade. Aaron looked at Jade. Jade nodded at Aaron. Aaron spat at the fire and went. Aaron snarled at Timothy as he went. Timothy sat. Thomas dusted the dirt off his back. "Go on now. Tell us." Timothy told his 4 captors of the Lord Leofano and the tragic death of his son, and of the fate of the parties Leofano set out for the Boar's Head, and many other strange occurrences that took place in this cursed forest in the years since Timothy explained what the foresters nervously called the first hunt, had ignited something within the wild boar. The curse. Half amused but unpersuaded to leave all that they had gained, the 4 wild men dragged Timothy out of the camp and tied him to a tree. Timothy screamed and pleaded for the men to just kill him, and the grizzled bandits simply mocked him and went back inside the walls of the camp, leaving Timothy in the darkness. The 4 men drank a bit and celebrated their victory, gorging themselves on the foresters' abundant supplies of bread, meat, and wine. And before too long, they became tired and sluggish, and so turned down for the night. Chapter 6. Stay too long. Angered the beast. Waking up the next day around the campfire, the men ate some breakfast, then gathered the goods from the camp and the ground cellar, fastening everything to their horses and carrying the rest, noticing there was no boar meat in the cellar. They talk about it for a moment and decide the hunters were just superstitious. After organizing everything in preparation to take it to the drop location, they guided their horses through the camp. As he walked, Thomas looked over at the charred remains of the 2 huts, now no longer burning. He could see the 2 black and red corpses of 2 foresters on their knees, clenched in an ashy embrace, their skin charred, cracked like a desert after a hard rain. Red, sap-like bubbles and stripes between the cracks in the curled, blackened skin. The huts have stopped burning, but their love for each other will never stop, Thomas joked to Seven, making a thrusting motion with his hips. Seven began laughing hard. Aaron and Jade looked back at the 2. Seven immediately pulled his horse bridle. Catching up to Jade and Aaron, Seven repeated the joke to them. They all laughed a hearty, thunderous laugh. Thomas, frustrated by this, made another joke, but not as good as the first. Their laughter subsided at Thomas's new joke as the men left the camp. Seven, check on the last one and finish him if he hasn't yet pissed himself to death, Jade ordered Seven. Make Thomas do it, Seven asked, looking at Thomas, smiling with disdain. I don't care who does it, Jade retorted with disdain. Thomas, go check on that, Jade commanded, still looking forwards as he led his horse. Thomas rolled his eyes, handed his bridle to Aaron, and went to check on the last forester. He walked to where they had tied Timothy to a tree. Getting close, Thomas found nothing but loose rope and a few pieces of cloth and dried blood scattered across several loops of the rope. Thomas ran back to the others. He is not there. He's gone, Thomas yelled as he approached. What? Jade stopped his horse and turned. What do you mean gone? Jade shouted back. Nothing there, just rope and cloth. He must have slithered out. That's fine, he won't get far. It would take him at least 3 days on foot to warn anyone, and another day if they travelled back through the night. We will be long gone by then, Jade said confidently. Aaron and Seven nodded in agreement. But what if something got after him? Thomas asked. Like what? Jade questioned. The bleeding curse. Don't let that horse shit get to you, Thomas, Jade said. The curse, Seven muttered to himself, silently straightening his posture. Thomas looked at his feet, grimacing. Jade looked at Thomas, rolled his eyes, and continued ahead with his horse. We have more to care for than some frightened hunter. He is long gone by now, Jade insisted. Probably pissing himself as he runs, Aaron added. Thomas nodded doubtfully. After a few hours of walking, the men found a safe place to unload all the loot they had accumulated from the camp. 3 barrels of wine in charred barrels, one nearly half dry from the night before. Several axes, over a dozen bows and swords, 2 cured deer carcasses, a small barrel of lard, several quivers of arrows, 4 tunics of chainmail, 6 pairs of boots they had taken off the corpses of the men they slain, and 20, some odd skins. After offloading their horses, they tied them to a tree nearby and made their way back to the camp. On the way back, the bandits caught sight of a family of deer led by a 10-point stag. They looked in awe at the majesty of nature, and with excitement for the poaching they would do the next 2 days. As they continued, the sun had begun to set, Near the camp, a boar was eating a piece of meat Thomas had dropped earlier. Thomas giggled to himself. "What eats my meat I eat," he thought. But the men, not knowing the nature of the boar in passing, passed too close. The boar darted its head up and stared. Sevin flinched at the sight. A moment later, it hopped up on its front hooves and, squealing, it charged the bandits. Sevin let out a high-pitched scream, and in a moment all 4 of the bandits were running for their lives through to the half-darkened forest from a boar no more than 100 pounds. Thomas tripped with a shout. Aaron helped him up, and soon they caught sight of the camp. As the men made it near the back gate, Aaron looked behind them, but the boar was gone. He slowed his pace and scanned the area, then stopped. "It's gone," he said loudly. The other 3 stopped their frantic run and walked back over to Aaron. "I could swear I just heard it screaming at us," Thomas said. Aaron shook his head from side to side suspiciously. He replied. "Well, it's not now," Aaron continued. "Well, come on then, fellas," Jade said, and walked towards the open gate. The rest of the men followed, Aaron turning last. Something about the fear he had felt pierced him with a deep foreboding. Walking through the gate, Jade froze and motioned with his hands at his sides for the men to stay back. A boar proudly trotted from the inside of the camp, passing right next to them, holding something in its mouth. It snorted as it passed, bobbing its head at them. Jade, Thomas, and Aaron could not discern what it held in its mouth, but Sevin could see it was the mangled hand of a huntsman. Sevin gasped, and the 4 brigands stood motionless, save for their breathing, as the beast faded into the shadows of the now dark forest. They continued cautiously, walking back to the forester's camp. They gathered all the rest of the loot they planned to take to their spot in the forest the next day at the center of the camp. They closed the gates, started a fire, and prepared for bed. "Good night, boys," Jade said, rolling over under a thick rough cloth next to the fire. "Good night," said Thomas. Sevin was thinking intently about the boar that had chased them and the man-eating beast that had proudly walked out of the camp. The next morning, the 4 bandits woke to the smell of burning pine wood and the stench of the men they had slaughtered that were now beginning to rot. Carrying the last of the loot, they made an early start. "I was thinking," Sevin said to Jade bashfully as they walked. "Thinking what?" Jade returned. Jade was thinking, "I should tell him not to do that. He's not very good at it. Just that with everything we have, maybe we could just go sell it and skip the hunting," Sevin premised. "We've got plenty of room on our saddles for a few deer and maybe a boar. Why would we leave?" Jade could see that Sevin seemed on edge. "Well, some of these boar are pretty large animals," Sevin said while Jade interrupted him. "There are 4 of us." "You're afraid of a stupid animal?" Jade said, laughing at Sevin. Sevin furrowed his brow but didn't respond. "What are you all going on about?" Thomas interjected. "Sevin wants us to leave when we get back to the horses." "I think he is scared of pigs," Jade said to Thomas, smiling. "Ah, well, I'm looking forward to the hunt. Don't think I've had king's meat before." "Maybe he's just worried he won't get one himself," Thomas said with humor in his words. Jade and Thomas looked at each other, then back at Sevin, smiling. "Hey, what's that?" Aaron shouted in a panic. Sevin, Thomas, and Jade looked over to where Aaron was staring. "Oh no," Aaron said, his voice wavering. And just to the right of them, 2 large boar were tearing at the flesh of a man wearing the clothes of a forester. Startled by Aaron's shouts, the 2 animals stopped gorging themselves on the dead man and charged after the men. "Whoa!" Aaron yelled. The men stepped back. Jade drew a bow and shot one of the animals in its side, and the other beast fled, while the other charged into Aaron. It knocked Aaron flat and began chewing on his knee, goring his other leg as Aaron tried kicking it off. Thomas started hacking at the back of its neck with his sword. Aaron howled in pain and stabbed the boar's face. The creature squealed and stumbled off of Aaron, then collapsed. Thomas ran over to it and vigorously hacked at it some more before it stopped breathing. Aaron lay on the ground, grunting in pain. Sevin tore the cloth from his leg. Thomas was panting, holding his blood-soaked sword while Jade stood in shock. Sevin tried helping Aaron with his leg. "This is the curse. I'm telling you. Seven shouted, while tying torn bits of Aron's pants over his wounds. I'll hear nothing of it. I'll admit these beasts are deadly and aggressive. We just need to keep our guards up, Jade asserted, feeling frightened himself, but had too much pride to express that. Aron is injured. He can't hunt. I say, we should leave with the loot, Seven insisted frantically. Don't drag me into your delusions, Seven. I'm fine hunting. This is just AAA. This is nothing. I've had plenty worse, Aaron shouted in pain as Seven pulled a knot tighter. Thomas stood above the beast, still breathing heavily, looking down at it with a combination of fear and contempt. Thomas looked at his friends and at the wounds on the corpse as to the man the pigs had been gnawing on and felt sick. As his stomach wrenched, he almost puked. They were eating a man, Thomas said softly, his face pale with wide eyes. They are beasts. They'll eat anything. Don't tell me you're frightened of spirits too, Thomas, Jade expressed rudely. His pride was wavering at the thought of being outnumbered or by the opinions of his men. Jade felt he needed a way to quell this argument. You all go to the loot and make a camp. Take good care of Aaron. I'm going hunting. I'll meet you all there in a few hours. Aaron, Jade said, staring assertively at his friend. We will hunt together tomorrow. But, Seven tried arguing, but Aron interrupted. Right, now help me up, Seven, Aaron said, and Seven was silenced. The three men went to set up a camp, and Jade handed over what he was carrying, all except his bow, dagger, and swords. Jade thought if he brought back one boar to his men in a few hours, they would stop whining about the curse. Jade made his way through the forest with caution, being as wary as he could be of the boar traveling alone. He saw several deer on his walk, but was determined to kill a boar for his men. Thomas, Aaron, and Seven made it back to their horses. Aaron limped on his injured leg, using Seven for support. Seven helped Aaron to sit on a small barrel, while Thomas started making a fire for the night. As evening fell, Jade found a mother boar nesting, suckling two baby boars. Silently, he scouted around the area for any other boars so that he could take the mother without being attacked. Having made sure the area was clear of any other boar, he crept closer to the mother boar. Once close enough, he sprinted a few steps towards her and started stabbing her around the neck and face. The boar struggled, and Jade went to the ground. He wrestled with the mother for a moment, while the two baby boars detached and watched in horror. After 33 stabs to the neck and face, she finally stopped her struggle, dead. He rolled her off of himself and saw the two baby boars staring at him. He smiled and jumped up, running after them. One ran, the other stayed frozen in fear. He grabbed it by the ears, lifting it into the air, slitting its throat, and tossed its bleeding body by its mother. Immediately, Jade chased after the other. Falling forwards, reaching, he quickly caught it by its hind legs. Jade, angered by the fear in his men and being the harsh man that he was, at this point did not even care about the meat. He got back to his feet, dangling the baby piglet by its hind legs, and slashed down its stomach, gutting it. The piglet squealed as its intestines spilled from its stomach, and blood and bile sloughed to the earth. Nearly nightfall by now, he thinks his friends have probably just about finished with their camp. He sliced out the three animals' organs, then wrapped the two babies in a large cloth and draped the mama boar over his shoulders. Hearing some squealing in the distance, Jade eerily started his way to his companions. When Jade finally made it back to the camp, night had fallen, but Jade could see a fire and hear Thomas and Aron arguing. Jade, you're back! See, I told you, I knew he would make it back. Now we must go search for Seven, Aaron shouted at Thomas as Jade stepped out of the darkness, lit by the orange-yellow flames of the fire. Are you crazy? Thomas shouted back. We both saw what's out there. Seven is dead. And if by some miracle he is still alive, we won't find him wandering in the darkness ourselves. Not with those things out there. Both of you, shut your mouths. What are you saying? What happened to Seven? Jade shouted at Thomas and Aron. Why are you screaming at each other? Tell me what's going on at once, he continued. Jade was tired and panicked, and now full of anger and confusion, he dropped the boar, his bow, and stood there glaring at Thomas and Aron. We were surrounded by those monsters, and Seven was so afraid he ran into the woods, Thomas said in a panic. Yes, and several of them went after him to curse. It's real, Aaron shouted. Jade walked up to Aaron and grabbed the front of his tunic. They're just animals. Just animals, Jade shouted, shaking Aaron furiously by his clothes. Thomas tried separating Aaron and Jade to no avail. We have to leave. Jade, Aaron said fearfully. His voice wavered with every word. We leave when we are done. If you don't get your head straight, I'll straighten it for you, Jade shouted, still holding Aaron by the collar. Aaron swung at Jade and knocked him unconscious. Thomas moved, narrowly avoiding Jade falling on him. Well, that's just shit. Now we're a man down, Thomas said to Aaron, and he won't be happy when he wakes up. Aaron stood there in a stupor, as if confused at what he had just done. Thomas grabbed Jade's arms and started pulling him towards the fire. Well, come on and help me, Aaron, he asserted. They dragged Jade next to the fire and laid the board Jade hunted beside him. Deeper out in the pitch-black forest, Sevin was trying to find his way back to a main road, shivering and cringing at every sound, tearing through branches with desperate disregard of the noises he was making or the direction he traveled. Heaving and panting in desperation, Sevin was losing his strength. Slowing his pace to regain his composure, he unsheathed his sword for protection. Feverishly, he turned and slashed at the sound of an owl hooting in the distance behind him. After calming down for just a moment, Sevin realized he did not know in what direction the road was or which way to go for the camp. But filled with a panicked determination, Sevin began running. Again, he bolted back through the trees in search of escape. In just a few minutes, he tripped on a branch extending from the base of a tree. Sevin heard growling in the dark close to where he had fallen, and looking up, he saw 6 silvery eyes, lit only by the pale reflected light of the moon. Back at the camp, Jade lay next to the fire, drooling in a deep, peaceful rest. Aaron sat atop a barrel of wine on the opposite side of the flames. Aaron leaned forward on the barrel, filling a cup of bull's horn with wine in an effort to calm his nerves while anxiously awaiting Jade's return to consciousness and the anger and possible violence that may ensue once he awakened. If he even remembers, Aaron thought to himself in hopeful consolation. Thomas put more logs in the fire. Don't be dulling your senses with that. We're only 2 now till Jade wakes up, Thomas said to Aaron with a slight air of compassion in his voice. I'll be no good in a fight anyhow, not with this mangled leg, Aaron returned in defense. Keep the fire bright through the night and it will be Jade, not the beast's wrath we'll have to deal with. Aaron took a gulp of wine. You'll keep him off me, won't you, Thomas? Aaron said, wiping his mouth. If it comes to that, I mean. Thomas just looked at Aaron with a frown and dropped another log in the fire. It cracked, and embers sparked out. Just then, a high-pitched scream of a man in pain reverberated off the trees. Thomas darted his head in the direction of the disheartening sound. Aaron jilted on his seat. The liquid sloshed in the barrel, and with his injured leg, Aaron had to drop his cup and now hold on with both hands to keep himself from toppling over. Both men froze. Their stomachs dropped to their guts. They stared wordlessly beyond the softly lit rows of trees into the relentless pitch dark of the forest. Sevin's scream of agony rose and fell like a stone skipping across the glassy, still darkness, rippling from tree to tree. Thomas thought of going out to rescue Sevin, but before he could decide against it, the sound of Sevin stopped abruptly. Just then, Jade made a loud grunting sound and rolled to his side away from the fire and continued snoring loudly, startling Thomas and Aaron. We must make the fire bigger. If they come back, they will not bother us if the fire is bigger, Thomas said in a panic. Aaron stared at Thomas with wide eyes and motioned to his leg. Thomas sighed and began cautiously marching around their camp, picking up fallen branches and throwing them into the fire, making sure not to step too far into the darkness. He hoped Jade would wake up soon, so they would have greater numbers, and so he would not feel so alone. Aaron, still sitting atop the barrel of wine, silently shared this sentiment. He was unnerved by Thomas's frantic behavior and feared the snapping of twigs and noise of Jade snoring might attract the beast's attention. Aaron stared into the fire as it grew, drinking wine, agitated by every sound of the forest. Thomas sat down next to Aaron, sweating and exhausted. Aaron looked up from the flames at Thomas and saw him staring wide-eyed and pale-faced into the forest. Looking at the tree line behind Thomas, Aaron could see an uncountable number of bright yellow-sheened eyes watching them from the shadows. Aaron gasped, swinging his head in the direction Thomas was glaring, and saw many more beastly yellow eyes staring back at him. The fire flickered in their eyes, but Aaron could somehow feel a deep, indescribable darkness within every pair. A feeling that he could intuit Thomas was entranced by as well. Thomas and Aaron both saw one of the beasts look away from them and towards the fire, and in a wave of glowing eyes, the rest of the shaded figure's eyes followed the one, like the gaze of a hydra. Entranced, Aaron and Thomas's stare followed that of the many beasts, as if one with them. Their stare fell upon the carcass of the several boar that Jade had slaughtered. The feeling poured into Aaron and overflowed. He thought the beast would charge and mangle them if he did not give them what they wanted. Then a mad idea came to him, and as Aaron pondered, it quickly became a certainty in his mind. Aaron stumbled off the barrel of wine, scrambling towards the carcass Jade had brought back with him. He grabbed hold of the mother boar's hooves. A loud squeal pierced the cold night air, and Jade startled back to consciousness as Aaron looked behind him to the location of this heart-dropping sound, while he dragged the lifeless boar towards it. He saw a large Goliath of a boar hoof its way to the front of the line of beasts, carrying itself with a proud, somber demeanor. The other swine cautiously lowered their tusks and stepped aside, making a path for it. As the massive boar walked slowly into the light ahead of its fellows, it squealed, staring at Aaron as he stumbled, dragging the carcass in its direction with great effort. Aaron paused for a moment, shaking at the sound, before continuing, dragging the large dead animal along with his wounded leg. Thomas could do nothing but watch, frozen in fear, as Aaron continued, driven by hope and dread. The gigantic beast stood towering over the other boar. It stomped the earth beneath it, staring at the meat Aaron dragged with him. Now just feet away, Aaron could feel the ground shake with every impact of the boar's hooves. Jade felt in a haze, just waking up from a bout of unconsciousness, not remembering what had happened, but feeling a throbbing in his head. He assumed he had gotten too drunk and fallen asleep. As his eyes adjusted, he was taken by the chaotic scene. Through the blazing light of the fire, he saw and heard the beasts in the forest, dimly lit, surrounding their camp, and Thomas frozen, petrified with fright. "Thomas, what is this?" Jade shouted over to him, but Thomas stood pale and motionless like a statue. All he could do was stare out at Aaron, who was now on all fours, kneeling behind the carcass of the hunted boar, weeping for mercy. Tears streaming down his cheeks, Aaron wordlessly implored the massive creature to spare their lives. Jade, seeing Aaron's display, called over to him, "Aaron, get away from there." Jade instinctively looked back to Thomas to gauge his reaction to this. There was no change in Thomas's demeanor, save for the tears now streaming down his face, as he hollowly glared at Aaron and the massive creature standing in front of him. The confusion and pounding in Jade's head and face turned to a disappointed anger at his confused companions. Jade screamed out loud, encouraging his men to be calm. "With such a big fire, there is no way they will come closer," he insists, but still no change in the men. Aaron, only just now half aware of Jade's presence, thought to himself in a feverish stupor, still more than half drunk. "The boar did not surround us till just before he arrived with the kill. This must be what they are after. Take this and spare us, please." Aaron's mind shouted to itself as tears and wine-scented breath poured from Aaron's eyes and mouth. Jade watched as the gigantic scarred beast marched forwards and seemingly bowed gracefully at the feet of the mother boar's carcass. With dark, somber eyes, the massive boar latched onto its lifeless fellow with its teeth and began dragging it slowly backwards into the darkness of the trees. Jade's frustration turned quickly to rage at the sight. He ran towards Aaron. Kicking him aside, he dove forwards, trying to grab and wrestle back the boar carcass he had fairly poached. Falling through the air, he landed with a puff of dust with his arms outstretched, but just barely missed the corpse by his fingertips. The massive boar continued pulling it into the shadows. Surrounding Jade, there were over a dozen snarling beasts, glaring at Jade and Aron with tears streaming down his cheeks, looking over at Jade with his back in the dirt. Oblivious to the danger surrounding him, Jade sprung back to his feet and began walking back towards the fire with furious determination. Jade marched over next to the flames and, bending down, grabbed the tightly wrapped cloth containing the two baby beasts. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, Thomas tackled Jade to the ground and the two men began physically wrestling over the carcasses. Aaron was too frightened by the boar surrounding them in his drunken stupor to look away and tried to break up the fight. Thomas pulled on the fabric. Still on the ground, Jade kicked up at Thomas's chin and Thomas collapsed right next to the fire. Across the camp, Aron lay on his side, pleading with the boar to take the carcass and leave them be. In a kerfuffle of words, he explained to the boar that him and his friends did not know this was their forest, and if they take back the carcass, he and his friends will leave the forest and never return. Thomas was staring in bewildered shock around the camp at the boar surrounding them, Aaron's manic speech only fueling the fear inside him. Aaron climbed to his knees and peered into the darkness, crying, now completely lost in an emotional frenzy, crying half out of fear, believing what he is witnessing to be his eventual fate, and half out of joy, taking it as an act of the boar, accepting his plea. Confused and now very mortified, Jade starts to shed tears as well. Jade sees Thomas on his knees weeping, and Thomas laying crumpled, also weeping by the fire, looking over at him with tears in his eyes. Anger builds in Jade, rage. He stands, breathing heavily, feeding, holding the cloth containing the two baby boars. Unfurling it, the two small carcasses are tossed out into the air, landing in the fire. Jade screams to get his, he believes, now insane friend's attention. A sacrifice to you, O King of Boar Kings, for our safe passage through your forest. Tears still in their eyes, Aaron and Thomas look in horror at Jade and the two small carcasses in the fire. Aaron looked quickly back into the darkness for the king boar, placing one hand on the ground in front of him in preparation to run. The men see the beast clamber back into the light, the other swine falling over each other, attempting to make way for the massive creature's hulking form. The thin bottom half of its legs seemed to flail about randomly as its upper body glided smoothly towards Aaron, halted in silence. Its gaze darted from Aaron to Thomas to the fire. The beast stared for a moment, then squealed deafeningly. Jade stared at it, angry and confused, moving each shoulder from one side to the other. Jade put his hand on his hip to defend with his knife if the beast were to charge, but it was no longer in its sheath. It had fallen out in the struggle of Thomas and him wrestling. The beast, still loudly squealing, the animal charged with its massive body at the fire. Jade's heels, kicking the dirt, backed up further on the other side of the fire. Aaron just made it to his feet as the humongous pig charged past him, but was charged by another and knocking him to the ground. Aaron is quickly surrounded. In what felt like an instant to Aaron, one large boar plopped down over his abdomen, and before he could even think to go for a weapon, several more of the boars surrounding him bit into his arms, legs, wrists, and ankles, not chewing through, just restraining them. Several more march out from the crowd and begin tearing Aaron's flesh, consuming him bite by moderate bite from his extremities as he struggled and screamed in pain. His breath getting shorter with each shout, the air being squeezed from his lungs by the weight of the large swine laying across his stomach. The animal atop Aaron's abdomen bit down through the fabric of his pants into his hip and pulled up slowly, stretching and tearing flesh and cloth with a look of malaise in its eyes as the others, man and beast, screamed around and beneath him. Jade, seeing all this take place so quickly, is horrified. Aaron screams again as one of the boar takes a small chunk of flesh from his cheek. Jade looks back at the charging boar. Thomas has already turned around and started to run into the forest. The large boar, screeching, charges right into the fire. The fire seems to explode. Fiery sticks and sparks fly in all directions. At this, Jade trips over his own feet. Now on his back, he sees Thomas run into the forest, while Laurent screams, heaving in agony. The massive boar's body spun in the fire, its gargantuan belly swaying from side to side as it pirouettes, looking to be dancing in the embers of the now exploded fire, squealing and goring as it made its macabre motion for the two small boar carcasses. Jade, frightful, hopped on his feet, turned and started to run. Turning back, he saw 7 growling, red-eyed beasts chasing after Thomas as he fled into the forest. Fearing for his own, Jade turned, continuing his retreat into the dark forest, sprinting as fast as his legs could propel him. Soon the sound of stomping hooves, the tearing of flesh, the snorting growls, and Aaron's howls of pain fell distant as Jade fled. Jade pictured in his mind the massive boar dancing in the fire, somehow aware of his exact location in the forest, and just then, he heard the large beast squeal loudly above the rest. Distant rustling and snapping of branches and leaves started to echo closer between the trees toward him. Wandering through the woods in search of a road, Jade silently mourned the death of his friends and pondered what he would do if he managed to make it back to civilization. Maybe I'll start a tavern. I've got plenty of loot stashed away in these hills, or I could find a new gang. Definitely won't be poaching pigs again. He nervously smiled to himself. Maybe I could start a farm and work the land, put the bandit life behind me. Jade doubtfully thought to himself, sweat seeping from the pores of his dirt-covered face. Elsewhere in the forest, Thomas was running for his life as a pack of ravenous beasts followed after him. Unable to see more than 3 feet in front of him, Thomas barreled face first into a sapling. Thomas fell to the floor in a daze. Clenching his bloody face, he crawled forward desperately. Before he could attempt to stand, one of the beasts charged forward from the darkness, then sunk its yellowed teeth into the back of his calf. Thomas shrieked, screamed in agony, rolling over onto his back. He kicked the beast with his free leg, attempting to shake it off with him. But the animal only tore deeper into his flesh. The turning motion stretched the skin and sprayed dark red blood, covering the ground and the mouth of the beast. Moments later, several other pigs emerged from the forest and began their feast upon Thomas while he screamed in agony, unable to escape. Jade could hear Thomas's screams from a distance. The agony of the sound curled like thorny vines in Jade's mind. He began to feel dizzy and sick. But before he could bring himself to expel his sick, he heard snorting and the sound of fast-moving hooves galloping closer to him from the pitch black. Again, Jade ran fearfully for his life, pushing through branches that slapped his face and limbs. Soon, up ahead, Jade could see a clearing in the woods by the sight of the moon shining through the trees, its light uninhibited through the branches. Coming to the edge of the tree line, Jade instinctively skidded to a halt. Just a few paces ahead of him was not a clearing, but a cliff. Jade had only moments to decide. The thoughts darted through his mind with lightning speed. If he turned back, he would surely be killed. If he ran to either side, he would suffer the same fate. But if he jumped and attempted to roll down the rocky cliff face, there was a chance, however slim, that he would survive. With a soul-dropping exhale, Jade stepped off the cliff with a dread-filled uncertainty for his life. He tumbled down the side of the dusty, rock-covered cliff. In the midst of the violent descent, his head slammed into a stone, knocking him unconscious before he reached the bottom. In Jade's state of unconsciousness, his mind was swept away to another world. He was being chased through a dark wood by a gigantic boar. He ran frantically through shadows with the moon's light barely seeping through, occasionally looking behind himself. Each time he peered back, it seemed the humongous wild boar was closer, drooling, crawling, snorting, bending trees out of the way with its hooves. He continued to run in a panic, knowing the giant pig would soon catch up to him and chew him to pulp, or possibly gore him to death with its huge tusks. Just as he was about to give up, to let the beast finish him, he saw a clearing through the trees. He ran desperately to it, swiping branches out of his way. When he made it to the edge of the tree line, at the clearing's center, there was a grey stone bell tower with no door. He stopped just for a moment, his eyes twitching from left to right, scanning the stones as if a door would suddenly appear. Looking quickly behind himself, the beast's head squeezed its way through 2 thick trees. Frightened, he paused for a moment. The monster knocked down the tree on the right with his front hoof. "Jade!" The book collector began climbing the stone tower, using only the tips of his fingers. As he ascended, the hog charged, slamming into the tower, shaking it, nearly knocking him off. It propped itself up with its front legs pushing against the tower. It chomped massive jaws just below Jade's feet. He continued to climb, setting the tips of his fingers atop the millimeter's edge of the stones, unaware of the impossibility of all this in his dream. He clambered up to the top. Only once he got there, he found no opening. It had disappeared. Or maybe he had simply missaw. Jade clung to the stones at the top of the tower, looking down. The boar began ramming the base. Shaking it more with each blow, stones began to crumble and break. Jade knew that with just a few more strikes, the tower would fall. The beast rammed again. Jade held tight and took a deep breath. Then, as the terror backed away for another go, Jade let go. Instantly plummeting towards the ground, he felt his stomach jump to his chest, his heart to his head, and soon he felt as if his whole body was above itself. The winds rushed, whistling past his ears. He hit the ground. His body seeped through the grass and ground like sand, if it were a liquid. He woke, startled for a moment. He found himself paralyzed at the bottom of the ravine. The flesh and muscle of his stomach was torn open. His intestines lay strewn out beside him as 2 boar peacefully snorted and chewed on his still half-alive flesh. Jade noticed that he could feel none of this, then went back to sleep, never to reawaken in this world. The end.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Please like, subscribe, and stay tuned because I'll be posting more horror stories. And more frequently this time, I promise.